All right, let's dive into something really interesting today, talking about kind speech, especially from an Islamic perspective.
Okay.
You sent me these fascinating sources, excerpts from Kindness in Speech, an Islamic perspective, and Speaking Kindly, an Islamic ethical guide. And
Yes.
I'm really excited to kind of go through those with you.
Yeah, it's a very, very rich topic full of wisdom that I think applies even beyond, specific religious contexts.
Yeah, for sure. And that's actually what I'm kind of most curious about is
Yeah.
how these teachings can be applied to our daily lives and, just interactions.
Yeah, I think you'll find some really, really profound insights in these sources.
Okay, cool. Well, let's just jump right in by highlighting some key verses from the Quran, which is like the central religious text of Islam.
Right.
And the first one that really caught my eye was from Surah Al-Imran. That's 3.159.
Okay.
And a surah, by the way, is like a chapter in the Quran, if you're not familiar.
Right.
It's just amazing to me that over 1,400 years ago, the Quran was already like emphasizing gentle speech.
Wow.
It even specifically mentions the Prophet Muhammad, who's, obviously a central figure in Islam,
Yes.
and how his compassionate approach to leadership really resonated with people.
Yeah, what's really striking about that verse is that it emphasizes how kindness can really bring people together and unite them, whereas harsh speech only serves to push people away.
Right.
And I think if you think about it, words have always had this power to build or destroy relationships,
Yeah.
even to build or destroy communities.
For sure.
And even societies as a whole.
It's true. And it's like you think about just even one little comment can have this ripple effect.
Absolutely.
So then, speaking of impact, the next verse from Surah An-Nahl 16.125, this one really got me thinking because it talks about approaching communication with both wisdom and good instruction.
Yeah, powerful words.
Yeah, so powerful. But what do those actually look like in practice?
Yeah, so if we break it down, it's not just about what we're saying, but it's about how we say it.
Yeah.
Have you ever had that experience where you got some feedback and the feedback itself was maybe technically correct, but it just left you feeling kind of demoralized or maybe even angry at the person who gave it to you?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I've definitely been there. I
Yeah.
won't go into detail.
That's okay.
But you're right. Sometimes the delivery is just totally overshadowing the message.
Totally. And so when we talk about this idea of wisdom in speech, I think it means thinking about where the other person is coming from.
Okay.
Thinking about their perspective, thinking about their emotional state at the moment, and choosing words that are both truthful but also compassionate
Right.
at the same time.
And then I'm guessing good instruction is about being clear, constructive.
Precisely. Yeah, it's about trying to offer guidance in a way that is really helpful and really empowers the other person,
Right.
rather than just being overly critical or condescending.
Right. Okay, so we've got these verses from the Quran kind of setting the stage.
Yes.
And then both sources bring in what's called the Hadith, which are basically collections of sayings and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad.
Right.
And they're meant to offer more practical guidance on how to actually live out the principles of Islam.
Yes.
And one that really stood out to me was this one. The most beloved of people to Allah are those who are most beneficial to people.
No, that's something to think about.
I know, right?
If we all really took that to heart. I mean, just imagine if we started thinking about our words as potential acts of benefit.
Right.
Would we still be as quick to complain or criticize or gossip?
Yeah, it's a good question. I know. I would definitely probably be a lot more careful about what I said.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and there's this other hadith that kind of stopped me in my tracks. It says, whoever believes in Allah and the last day, let him speak good or remain silent.
Okay.
I get it. I get the intention.
Yeah.
But realistically, is it really possible to only speak if it's good?
Right.
What about those difficult conversations that we have to have sometimes, or offering constructive criticism? I mean, wouldn't that be considered beneficial in some cases?
That's a really, really important point. And it's actually something that comes up a lot when people are discussing this particular hadith.
Okay.
It's not really about never ever speaking up or never ever addressing a difficult topic.
Okay.
It's really more about making sure that when we do speak, that our words are mindful.
Okay.
And that they are intentional.
So less about complete silence and more about choosing silence over speech that might be hurtful or unproductive.
That's a really good way to put it, yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. I can definitely see how practicing that kind of restraint could just lead to more peaceful interactions overall.
Right.
And speaking of peace, both sources talk about how kind speech isn't just about being nice. It's about creating a genuinely positive and supportive environment.
Totally. It's about fostering understanding. It's about building connections that are really strong and contributing to this sort of sense of harmony in the community.
I love that. And, it's interesting because both sources also emphasize the importance of naya.
Yes.
And I've heard that term before, but could you just remind me what exactly that means?
Yeah, of course. So naya is an Arabic word, and essentially it means intention.
Okay.
And in the context of Islam, it's referring to the underlying motivation for whatever action we're doing.
Okay, so in this case, it's kind of like checking in with ourselves before we speak and saying like, okay, why am I saying this?
Yeah.
What impact am I actually trying to have with these words?
Exactly. It's about being really conscious of the energy that we're putting out into the world through our speech.
It's funny because I think it can be so easy to slip into autopilot with our words and just like say things without really thinking about the intention behind them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like, do our words actually match our values or do they reflect the kind of person we actually want to be?
Those are great questions, and they lead us very, very nicely into the next really key aspect that's highlighted in both of these sources,
Okay.
which is the importance of self-reflection.
Self-reflection, huh? Yeah, I think I could use a little more of that in my life for sure.
I think we all could, to be honest.
Right, but how does that actually look when we're talking about speech?
Well, I think a big part of it is becoming aware of our own patterns in the way we speak.
Oh,
So, for example, maybe we tend to interrupt people a lot when they're speaking, or maybe we rely a little bit too much on sarcasm.
ooh, sarcasm. Yeah, I can be guilty of that one sometimes.
It's a common one. It's a common one. But the point is that if we can become aware of those patterns, we can then start to consciously make a shift.
Right, so it's like noticing those little, I don't know what you call them, like verbal tics, and then making a conscious effort to replace them with something that's more mindful and more kind.
Yes, exactly. It's about actively shaping our speech to really be in alignment with the values we hold and the kind of impact that we really want to have on the world.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about the Quran, we've talked about the Hadith, the concept of naya, and the importance of self-reflection. It seems like there's a lot to unpack here.
There's a lot to unpack, but ultimately, I think it boils down to this. Kindness in speech is so much more than just being polite.
Right.
It's a really powerful tool for building bridges. It's a tool for fostering understanding.
Right.
And it's a tool for creating a world that is more compassionate and more harmonious.
And it sounds like from what we've explored so far, Islam offers some pretty profound guidance on how to do that.
It does. And as we go deeper, as we dive deeper into these sources and look at the practical applications and maybe some of the challenges that arise when we try to practice kind speech, I think you'll find that these teachings become even more relevant and insightful.
Well, I'm definitely ready to go deeper.
Awesome.
Okay, so we've laid some groundwork here, but now I'm really curious about how we can actually put these teachings into practice. I mean, it's one thing to talk about kindness in speech, but how do we actually make it a reality?
That is the million-dollar question, and it's where things get really interesting because remember, these teachings are not meant to just be abstract concepts.
Right.
They're meant to be lived and they're meant to be practiced.
Right, they're supposed to be practical, yeah. So where do we even start?
Well, one of the most important things is developing empathy.
Okay.
And both sources emphasize that, true kindness is not just about being nice or saying the right words.
Right.
It's about genuinely understanding and connecting with the person that you're speaking to.
Okay, empathy. Yeah, I would feel like I hear that word a lot these days, but honestly, sometimes it feels kind of fuzzy. How do we actually cultivate that, in our communication?
It starts with listening,
Okay.
really listening. And I mean, not just waiting for your turn to speak, but truly trying to understand the other person's perspective, their feelings, their needs.
So putting ourselves in their shoes, even if we don't necessarily agree with them?
Exactly. And, asking clarifying questions to make sure that you're understanding them correctly, like saying things like, what I'm hearing you say is, or is that right?
Okay.
Something like that.
And I'm guessing it also involves responding in a way that, acknowledges their feelings, even if we have a different viewpoint.
Absolutely. It's about validating their experience, even if it's not an experience that you personally share.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about, those times when we do need to have difficult conversations, like giving feedback or addressing a conflict?
Right.
Can we really be empathetic and assertive at the same time?
That is such a good question. And it's where that idea of wisdom and good instruction that we talked about earlier comes back into play.
Okay.
You can be firm and direct without being harsh or disrespectful.
So how do we walk that line? Got any practical tips?
Absolutely. Let's say, for example, you're in a meeting and someone presents an idea that you really disagree with.
Okay.
Instead of immediately jumping in with a critical response,
No.
try starting by acknowledging their effort and finding points of agreement.
So like find the common ground first before you get into like the areas where you differ.
Exactly. You could say something like, I appreciate you bringing this idea to the table, and I agree that mention a point of agreement. However, I do have some concerns about mention your point of disagreement.
I like that it feels like less confrontational and more like you're actually inviting a conversation.
Right. It's about approaching the situation from a more collaborative spirit rather than being oppositional.
Okay. That's helpful, I think, in like a work setting. But what about personal relationships? Those can get like really tricky sometimes.
Oh, they can, for sure. So let's say you need to give some feedback to a friend or a family member.
Okay.
Remember that idea of good instruction that we were talking about? It's about being really specific and being solution-oriented.
Yeah, okay.
Rather than making broad generalizations or, resorting to personal attacks.
Oh, that's a good point. So instead of saying something like, you're always late, you could say, hey, I noticed that you've been running behind schedule lately. Is there anything I can do to help you, manage your time better?
Perfect example. Yeah. It's about framing your feedback in a way that is actually helpful and supportive.
Right.
Rather than critical or judgmental.
And I'm guessing this also involves paying attention to our tone of voice and body language.
Yes.
Right? Because we can say all the right words, but if we're like rolling our eyes or crossing our arms, it's going to send a very different message.
Absolutely. Those nonverbal cues are so important, just as important as the words themselves.
For sure.
So it's really about making sure that your words, your tone, and your body language are all kind of aligned and all conveying that genuine sense of respect and understanding.
This is great advice. I'm definitely going to try to put this into practice. But I have to admit, like I'm still kind of wrestling with that hadith about remaining silent unless speaking good. It just feels like a really, really high bar to set. And I sometimes wonder if it's even possible to live up to that.
It is a high bar, and I think that's intentional.
Yeah.
It's meant to encourage us to constantly strive for excellence in our speech.
Okay.
To really pause before we speak and ask ourselves, are these words going to contribute something positive? Are they going to benefit myself or others?
I guess it's kind of like aiming for perfection, knowing that we won't always reach it.
Right.
But that just the very act of striving for it is going to make us better.
That's a beautiful way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember, too, that the hadith is not advocating for absolute silence.
Right.
It's emphasizing speaking good, which can encompass a wide range of expressions. It's not just about like one specific type of speech.
So it's about being mindful and intentional.
Yeah.
And choosing words that, uplift or inspire or offer comfort or share knowledge or contribute something positive to the conversation.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our words have immense power, but using that power for good.
As we're talking about this, I'm realizing that kindness in speech is not just some passive virtue.
Yeah.
It's like an active choice we're making in every single interaction.
Absolutely.
It's this conscious decision to use our words to build bridges or foster understanding and to create a more compassionate and harmonious world.
That's beautifully said. I think that's a key takeaway here. It's not just about being nice. It's about intentionally using our words to make a positive impact.
Yeah.
And I think what's really beautiful about that is that it's something that applies to everyone, regardless of what your background is or what you believe in.
Right.
The power of kind speech is a universal power.
So true. Okay, I think we're making good progress here.
Yeah.
We've talked about the Quran, the Hadith, the concept of naya, self-reflection, empathy, assertiveness, even like nonverbal cues. Is there anything else we should touch on before we move on?
There is actually, both sources highlight one more really important point, and that is addressing some of the common misconceptions about kindness in speech.
Ooh, misconceptions. I'm always up for debunking those, so lay it on me.
Okay, so one of the biggest misconceptions out there is that kindness equals weakness.
Oh.
Or that it means you lack assertiveness.
Okay.
Some people even view kindness as being naive or easily manipulated.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that perception arises, especially in a world that often seems to reward like aggression and dominance.
Absolutely.
But I'm guessing these sources offer a different perspective on that.
They do. From an Islamic perspective, true strength actually lies in self-control.
Okay.
It's about having the discipline to choose kindness and to choose respect, even when you're faced with challenging situations or difficult people.
So it's about responding rather than reacting.
Exactly.
Like taking that pause before we speak and considering the impact that our words are going to have.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that true power comes from within, from your ability to master your own emotions and to choose words that uplift and inspire rather than words that tear down and belittle.
It's about strength of character rather than strength of volume.
Precisely. And, it's important to remember that being kind doesn't mean being a pushover.
Right.
You can absolutely be kind and compassionate while also setting boundaries and standing up for yourself.
Right. It's not about suppressing our own needs or our own opinions.
Exactly.
It's just about expressing them in a way that's like respectful and considerate of other people.
Exactly. You can disagree with someone without being disagreeable.
Right.
You can be assertive without being aggressive.
Right.
It's about finding that balance between honesty and kindness, between standing up for yourself and showing compassion for others.
It's such a nuanced and like empowering approach to communication.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really powerful reminder that kindness is not about weakness. It's about choosing to act from a place of strength, wisdom, and compassion.
Well said. This has been a really insightful conversation. And I feel like I'm starting to really get a much clearer understanding of what kindness in speech actually means.
That's great.
Yeah, it's not just about, being polite or following religious rules. It's about creating this more positive and compassionate and harmonious world, both within ourselves and in our interactions with other people.
It's been a pleasure exploring these teachings with you, and I think this is actually a great place to kind of transition into some final reflections on this topic.
Okay, I'm ready. What are your parting thoughts?
Yeah, wow, that was a lot to take in.
It was a lot.
But seriously, that last point about our words impacting our own well-being, that really hit home for me.
Yeah.
It's like we often get so focused on how our words affect others, but we kind of forget that they're also shaping our own internal landscape.
It's such an important insight, and it really makes you think about this practice of kind speech in a whole new light.
It's not just about being good to other people, it's also about being good to yourself.
Exactly. It's like, even when we're just talking to ourselves, if we're using kind words, it's like we're creating this positive and supportive environment.
Yes.
But within our own minds.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that internal environment, the way we talk to ourselves, it really has a ripple effect on everything else in our lives.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, if we were to actually record our self-talk for a day, what would the transcript look like?
Yeah.
Would it be a conversation that we'd be proud of?
Right.
Or would it be full of negativity and self-criticism?
That's a really, really powerful exercise to think about. What if we actually approached our self-talk with the same level of intentionality and kindness that we, hope to use in our conversations with other people?
Oh, yeah, instead of beating ourselves up over a mistake, what if we offered ourselves words of understanding and encouragement?
Right. Imagine how different that would feel instead of fueling that cycle of negativity and self-doubt. You're actually fostering this sense of self-compassion and resilience.
Okay, I'm convinced. From now on, I'm going to talk to myself like I would talk to my best friend.
I love that.
With kindness and patience and support.
Yes. And remember, this whole practice of kind speech, it's not just about those big dramatic moments. It's also about the small everyday interactions as well.
Oh, you mean even just the little things we say to the cashier at the grocery store or the person holding the door open for us?
Exactly. Even those seemingly insignificant moments, they have a cumulative effect.
Right.
They contribute to the overall tone and energy of our interactions and ultimately the kind of world that we create.
So it's not just about these huge gestures of kindness. It's more about weaving kindness into just the fabric of our everyday lives.
Yes.
One word at a time.
Beautifully said. And I think that brings us right back to that core question we've been exploring throughout this whole deep dive.
Okay.
If our speech truly reflects our inner selves,
Yeah.
what are our words saying about us?
It's a question I think we could all benefit from asking ourselves.
Yeah.
Way more often.
I agree.
And honestly, it's a little humbling, isn't it?
It is.
Because it kind of forces us to confront that gap between our aspirations and our actions.
It does, but you know what? It's also incredibly empowering.
Oh, okay.
Because it reminds us that we have the power to choose our words.
Right.
And in doing so, we have the power to shape not only our outer world, but also our inner landscape.
And that's a pretty incredible power to have.
It is a pretty amazing power, and it's one that we all possess.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, and I feel like I've gained like a whole new appreciation for the power of kind speech.
Yeah.
It's not just about like being polite or following religious rules.
Right.
It's really about, creating a more positive and compassionate and harmonious world,
Yes.
both like within ourselves and in our interactions with others.
It's been a pleasure exploring all of this with you. And I hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights and tools to take with you.
It definitely has. Thanks for joining me on this journey.
Thank you for having me.
And to everyone listening, keep those words kind, keep those intentions pure, and keep